Hi, I'm Aline, and I'd like to tell you my story about my triple-negative breast cancer. I think I was the last person in the whole world that thought they'd ever get cancer, and everybody in my family has died of heart attacks or had other issues, and so I figured that would take me. And when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2020, the infamous COVID start, it was like a sucker punch because I knew of no one in my family, my biological family, who had cancer. And the only ones that I did know that had triple negative breast cancer had already passed. And so that punch to the gut was pretty intense. And I used a few four-letter profanities while they told me over the phone what I had. And it was rough in the beginning, more emotionally than anything. It took a little bit to get to the right doctors. They were not in a local hospital for me. We had lots of options as far as where we could go. And when I finally decided and I got to see my oncologist, she was phenomenal. I only had a small tumor. And when I said to her, but if you're taking one, you're taking them both. And she immediately said, okay, fine. Now, when were you diagnosed? And so I gave her the date, which was the middle of June. And she went, no, maybe it was the end of June. And she said, no, you've been waiting too long. Hold on just a minute. And she got on the phone and she called her office and said, clear my schedule for next week. And I have a bilateral mastectomy to do. And that's exactly what they did. So that was on a Friday, and the following Tuesday, I showed up in what absolutely shocks me now, in an outpatient care facility associated with the same hospital. And I had to be there early in the morning. And they had me not even in a wheelchair on my way out. Then one nurse on each side walked me to my car, and I left that facility at 5 o'clock that night, which blows my mind. But that's what they did, and I was nicely wrapped and drugged. It was a pretty big surgery. I was not small-breasted, and so I think the interns, because it was a teaching facility, they weighed them, and they were over 10 pounds of material. So that actually made me smile. It was the first thing I asked when I woke up. In any case, I came home and drove the hour and a half, and we were able to rearrange our house a little bit so that I could stay on the same floor where there was a bathroom. I did a fair amount of sleeping the first day or two, but I also had visitors and folks that came all masked up because it was COVID. And the drains that they used would fill a lot, but I learned pretty quickly how to make sure that they were emptied on time. And within a couple of weeks, I was feeling pretty normal, with the exception that I was terribly flat-chested. That was hard for me. I think of all the things that probably helped define me as I aged was my figure. And when I no longer had that figure, it was pretty startling. And I would look in the mirror and I was, to say the least, distressed. It wasn't a horrible scar or anything. In fact, it was beautiful. It looked like I had a red line across my chest. There was no loose tissue or anything. It was beautiful. And as it healed, it was good. But then the next step came the chemotherapy. So I would have to go back every week. Once I healed in my chest and the chemo started, I would go back every week and go through. And because it was COVID, my spouse was not able to be there with me while I underwent those treatments. That was hard. there's only so much you can do to occupy yourself, and I really wasn't in a position where I wanted to sleep. And they were long. I was usually there for 3 or 4 hours, and felt fairly weak when I left. And then I was met at the parking garage door and driven home. And that went on for, good Lord, I don't even remember now, because I know there were 2 different kinds of chemicals that they were using. And so they did the first few weeks were with the one, and then the second batch, that was a little more toxic. And so they would come in and they'd be all covered up with not just masks, but booties and gloves and practically one of those hazmat suits that you see on TV. When they drip a little bit on the counter, I remember one of the nurses saying, "Oh, there's $500." And all it was a little bitty drip. So, but we got through it. As I came to the end of that, and of course hair loss, and I guess I didn't suffer as much from nausea from the chemotherapy as many do. They were able to give me things beforehand that would help with that, but I was tired, and I like to hike. And it was, summertime, and then going into fall, which is my favorite time to hike, and it made for very long hikes. And I would go by myself because my spouse was working, and so they made me put 360 on my phone, which let them track me. That's how I got through it. I would just make sure that every day my 6-month-old puppy and I would go for a hike, and I got better at it. I was able to do, a mile or 2, and at one point I got all the way up to 7 miles, and that's while undergoing chemotherapy. So it's not the end of life. It's when you undergo that stuff. It is manageable, and you got to keep the right attitude and be positive. I had friends shave their heads when I lost my hair, so that we all went around with fuzzy heads. I had wonderful hats to wear, and there's tons of them online. And you can decorate them with feathers or with scarves or whatever you want to do. And that made me feel fun and silly, and it let me keep my sense of humor. Got through the chemo, and so this is now into January, I guess, of 21. And then the radiation started. And radiation was an everyday thing. I would have to drive into town, which was for me about a 40-minute drive. Not the hospital that I went to for my surgery or for the chemo, but a local hospital. And they were wonderful. I would get in and get right back out again. It takes all of about 10 minutes, if that. And that's being greeted in addition to everything else. They would lay what I thought was a piece of fabric. I knew it wasn't, but it was like fabric that they would lay across my chest. And what it did was to bring the radiation closer to the outside of the skin so that they didn't miss anything. And then once I was further along, they took that off so that it would let the radiation get deeper. Unfortunately, at the end of the radiation, I was fairly sore. It's like having a burn, and that burn was uncomfortable. But I'll tell you what, on that last day of my radiation, I got to ring that bell, and I was a pretty happy lady. Rang the bell and went outside, and my son and his children were greeting me at the door and brought me chocolate cake for me to celebrate. And that was the end of treatment. And then that weekend, some dear friends gave us the use of their condo in the mountains so that we could go ski or cross-country ski or just hike or do whatever, and we took them up on it. And the hospital was able to give me some I don't know, I guess it was kind of like Tegaderm, that they covered up the burns so that as I was walking with poles, I wouldn't rub and it would be more comfortable, which was perfect. And that's exactly what I did. And I hiked to the top of the mountain in snowshoes. And when I went to look to come back down that mountain, I screamed my head off in celebration, because I didn't think I'd be able to do that again. So that was the end of my treatment. I was real active during my treatment. I ate because my spouse put food in front of me, and there wasn't a question whether I was going to be able to or not. I just didn't eat a lot. In addition to all the testing that I went through, I was also recommended to do the BRCA1 genetic testing to see if I had a propensity for cancer in general. All of my tests with the BRCA1 all came back negative. However, I do want to mention that just because I tested negative doesn't mean that my children are clear. About a year after my treatment ended, my 38-year-old daughter was diagnosed with a very large lump that was also triple-negative breast cancer. And she, at the time that she was diagnosed and ready to go through her treatment, which ironically was very similar to mine, she was tested and came back 88% positive for breast cancer and 66% positive for ovarian cancer. I'm sorry to say that her father's side, all the women on his side of the family had been diagnosed with cancer, and they were not nearly as lucky as I am. And so she went ahead with all the steps that I went through. The difference being is that she did go through hormonal treatment to be able to shrink her tumor, which was the size of a golf ball. It was huge. And then she immediately went into chemotherapy using the same chemicals that they used on me. And then she did her surgery, and then she did the radiation. So her order of things was different than mine. She is now 42 years old, and she is cancer-free at this time. You need to know that when she was first diagnosed, she had a baby that was about a year old, as well as 2 older children. And so now her youngest is 6. And it's amazing to see how she now thrives after going through so much treatment. And I look at her and I think how much harder it was for her physically, but how grateful I am that I went through it so I could hold her hand as she went through it. She lives 10 hours away from me, and we spent most of our time at her home trying to give her the hope and motivation to be able to keep going, even though she had 3 young ones. So that resilience and that hope resounds in her now. And I hope someday she will tell her story as well. Every day I'd look in the mirror and I'd think, I made it this far, I can keep going regardless what I look like. And for me, that looking in the mirror was still really troubling to me. There's an organization out there who provide tattoos for people with cancer scars. And I think in October they really focus on women or men who've had breast cancer. and they're able to provide those tattoos at no charge. I applied the first year that I was cleared to be able to do that, and I was not accepted. I have no other ink on my body besides that, and I decided to do a small tattoo on my leg to just see what it felt like in case, you know. I wasn't accepted. I still have that lovely little tattoo on my leg. But then this past year, I was accepted. And I cried for 2 days afterwards because I was so excited. And so I actually traveled a bit of a distance in order to go to the studio that had accepted me. And I spent the weekend talking with the artist and being able to put my thoughts and desires across to her so that she could do the watercolor tattoo that I wanted. And so that tattoo was done that Saturday, October 4th, actually, of 2025. I have to think for a minute. And I didn't watch her do it. I had no inkling of how it was turning out. I'm a watercolor artist, and I really wanted it to be looking like a watercolor. So when she was done and she said, "Do you want to see it?" Now I have all these people around me. I stood up and I looked in the mirror, and all I could do was cry. I had tears running down my face. And every day since, I can look in the mirror and I can see that there's hope, that there is a way to appreciate your body, even after having it, what some would call disfigured. There's hope even after you've been diagnosed that they get it all. I am, well, actually, I'll be 6 years in remission this summer. So I'm ecstatic that I'm still able to sit here and tell my story. I'm able to give women help when they think, well, I'll be lopsided or I'll be, you don't have to be. There are lots and lots of options out there. And for me, I didn't want to listen to any of those options, even though my 45-year-old son really thought I should talk to a plastic surgeon. And so to appease him, I did, and I still felt like I didn't need any reconstruction. What ended up being right for me was this tattoo across my chest. Thank you for listening.